I thought it was a joke, a throwaway line during a family dinner. I laughed when I said that his dad was more attractive, and so did everyone else. But what I didn't know was that one joke would set off a chain of events so twisted, it ended with my boyfriend marrying my mom and leaving me without a home. It was a perfect Sunday afternoon in late October, and I'd organized what I thought would be a lovely family dinner at the house I shared with my mum. The leaves were changing outside, the kitchen smelled like roast chicken and herbs, and everything felt warm and domestic in the way that makes you grateful for the simple moments in life. My boyfriend Ryan had come over with his dad, Michael, who was visiting from out of town for the weekend. It wasn't unusual for us to have these kinds of mixed family gatherings. Ryan and I had been together for 2 years, and our families had gotten comfortable with each other over time. Michael was one of those men who'd aged incredibly well. At 52, he had that distinguished silver-haired look that made him seem more like a movie star playing a dad than an actual father. He was tall, fit from years of staying active, and had this confident charm that made conversation flow easily, no matter who he was talking to. My mom, Linda, 46 and recently divorced from my stepfather, had clearly made an effort with her appearance that day. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, had done her hair in a way that looked effortlessly elegant, and seemed more animated than usual during our pre-dinner conversation. Ryan, at 28, was handsome in his own right, but in a more understated way. He had his father's bone structure, but lacked that commanding presence that made Michael impossible to ignore when he walked into a room. Where Michael was confident and charismatic, Ryan was sweet and reliable, qualities I'd always appreciated about him. We were all gathered around my mum's dining room table, sharing stories and laughing over wine and home-cooked food. The conversation had somehow drifted to aging and attractiveness, sparked by Michael making some self-deprecating comment about getting older and losing his edge. My mom had jumped in to reassure him that mature men had their own appeal, and Ryan had jokingly complained that he couldn't compete with his dad's distinguished silver fox status. Everyone was laughing and teasing each other in that comfortable way families do when everyone's had just enough wine to be relaxed and honest. That's when my brain decided to contribute what I thought would be the perfect comedic observation to cap off the conversation. I looked at Ryan with this mischievous grin and delivered the line that would destroy my entire life. I told him that, honestly, he was cute and all, but his dad was a total silver fox. The words came out playful and teasing, like I was just building on the joke he'd started about not being able to compete with Michael's looks. I laughed immediately after saying it, that automatic laugh you do when you think you've just delivered the perfect punchline. I expected everyone else to burst out laughing too, to appreciate how I'd escalated the family teasing in such a cleverly inappropriate way. The reaction wasn't quite what I expected, but it wasn't alarming either. Michael gave this polite chuckle and made some modest comment about being flattered by the compliment. My mom laughed a little too loudly and said something about how I always knew how to stir up trouble. But there was something in her laugh that seemed different, more excited than the situation really warranted. Ryan's reaction was the only one that should have worried me. He froze for just a moment, his smile becoming tight and forced. Under the table, I could see his hand gripping his fork so hard that the metal was actually bending. But he recovered quickly, making some joke about being shown up by the old man again. I waved off the momentary tension, telling everyone to relax and that I was obviously just kidding around. The conversation moved on to other topics, and the rest of dinner passed pleasantly enough. I thought the whole thing had blown over and become just another funny family story we'd laugh about later. But looking back, I can see that something fundamental shifted in that moment. The dynamic between all four of us had changed in ways I wouldn't understand until it was far too late to do anything about it. I'm Zoe, I'm 29, and I've always been the queen of sarcasm. I've always thought jokes make everything easier, that humor can diffuse any tension and make people more comfortable with uncomfortable truths. Until this one didn't. Ryan and I had been together for 2 years, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, It was solid and comfortable. We'd met through mutual friends at a barbecue, bonded over our shared love of hiking and obscure documentaries, and gradually built something that felt stable and long-term. We'd been living together in my mum's house for the past 6 months after I'd lost my marketing job during company layoffs. It wasn't ideal. I was 29 and living with my mother like some kind of failed adult. But it was supposed to be temporary, while I found something new and got back on my feet financially. My mom had been incredibly generous about letting both Ryan and me stay there while we figured out our next steps. She seemed to genuinely like Ryan, often commenting on how much more mature and reliable he was than my previous boyfriends. She'd even started including him in family decisions and asking his opinion on things like home repairs and weekend plans. I'd been grateful for how well they got along, especially since my relationship with my mom had been complicated over the years. Having Ryan there as a kind of buffer made family dinners and everyday interactions much more pleasant than they'd been when it was just the two of us. But in the weeks following that Sunday dinner, I started noticing changes in the household dynamic that I couldn't quite put my finger with. Ryan became more distant and secretive in ways that were subtle but consistent. He'd always been somewhat reserved, but now he seemed distracted and preoccupied, even during our private moments together. He started staying up later, claiming he was working on job applications or reading, but I'd catch him texting someone at odd hours. When I asked who he was messaging so late at night, he'd give vague answers about family stuff or work contacts. Nothing that seemed suspicious enough to worry about, but enough to make me wonder what was occupying so much of his mental energy. Even more noticeable was how much better Ryan and my mom seemed to be getting along. They'd always been friendly, but now they were actively seeking out each other's company in ways that went beyond normal household politeness. I'd come home from job interviews or errands to find them chatting in the kitchen, cooking dinner together, or sitting on the back porch having what looked like deep conversations that would end abruptly when I appeared. When I asked what they'd been talking about, they'd give me generic responses about current events or family gossip. My mum started planning elaborate meals and family activities with an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the occasion. She'd spend hours preparing dinner and insist that Ryan help her with the cooking, while I was relegated to setting the table or cleaning up afterward. She also started dressing differently when she knew Ryan would be around, more attention to her hair and makeup, choosing outfits that were more flattering and stylish than her usual casual home clothes. I mentioned it to her once, teasing her about trying to impress my boyfriend, and she laughed it off by saying she was just trying to make more of an effort with her appearance in general. At the time, I assumed they were bonding for my sake. I thought my mum was making an extra effort to build a relationship with Ryan because she saw how serious we were about each other, and I figured Ryan was reciprocating because he wanted to make a good impression on my family. I was completely, devastatingly wrong. The signs were all there, but I was too trusting and naive to recognize what was actually happening under my own roof. I thought I was living in a harmonious extended family situation where everyone was making an effort to get along for the greater good. Instead, I was watching my boyfriend and my mother fall for each other while I remained obliviously grateful that they were getting along so well. The revelation came in the most brutal way possible. On a Friday in late November, Ryan announced that he was going on a family trip to visit some relatives upstate. He said his dad had planned a long weekend getaway and wanted Ryan to join him for some father-son bonding time. It seemed reasonable enough. Michael lived several hours away, and they didn't get to spend much time together. I was actually happy for Ryan to have some time with his dad, especially since he'd been so stressed about job hunting and our living situation. I thought a few days away might help him reset and come back feeling more like himself. Ryan left early Saturday morning with a weekend bag and promises to call me later. I spent the day catching up on household chores and job applications, enjoying the rare luxury of having the house to myself for a few hours. That's when my mom dropped the bomb that would shatter my entire understanding of reality. She came into the living room where I was working on my laptop, looking nervous and fidgety in a way I'd never seen before. She sat down across from me and said she had something important to tell me, something that was going to be difficult to hear. My first thought was that she was sick, or having financial problems, or dealing with some family crisis I didn't know about. I braced myself for bad news about her health, or my grandparents, or some other normal family emergency. Instead, she told me that she and Ryan had developed feelings for each other. The words didn't make sense at first. I literally asked her to repeat what she'd said, because my brain couldn't process the information. She was talking about Ryan, my boyfriend of 2 years, who was supposedly on a trip with his father. But then she showed me her phone, and my world collapsed completely. Photos, dozens of them. Ryan and my mother at some beach resort, holding hands like lovers, kissing on the sand, sharing romantic dinners with ocean views. The timestamps showed they'd been taken over the past 2 days. The same 2 days Ryan was supposed to be on a family trip with his dad. I stared at the images, trying to make them make sense. This had to be some kind of mistake, some cruel joke or misunderstanding. But there was no denying what I was seeing. My boyfriend and my mother were together, romantically, while I'd been sitting at home believing he was bonding with his father. The confrontation that followed was surreal and devastating. I called Ryan immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. When he answered, I could hear ocean waves in the background, confirming that he was exactly where those photos showed him to be. I demanded to know what the hell was going on, why there were pictures of him with my mother on what was supposed to be a father-son trip. My voice was shaking with anger and disbelief, and I was barely managing to form coherent sentences. Ryan's response was calm to the point of being chilling. He said that my comment about his dad being more attractive had gotten him thinking about our relationship and whether we were really right for each other. He said he'd started wondering if maybe I'd been settling for him when what I really wanted was someone more like his father. The circular logic was maddening. He was using my stupid joke as justification for having an affair with my mother, as if my thoughtless comment had somehow given him permission to blow up both our relationship and my family. When I tried to point out that there was a massive difference between making a joke about his dad being attractive and him actually pursuing my mother, he just said that actions speak louder than words, and that maybe this was how things were meant to work out. My mom, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, took the phone from me and started talking to Ryan in this soft, intimate voice that made me physically sick. They talked for several minutes, in tones that made it clear this wasn't a new development, that they'd been planning this betrayal for weeks, or maybe longer. When she hung up, my mum tried to explain that they hadn't meant for it to happen, that they'd just started talking and discovered they had a connection that surprised both of them. She said they'd tried to fight it out of loyalty to me, but that their feelings were too strong to ignore. The explanation felt like another slap in the face. They'd been conducting an emotional affair under my nose, while I'd been grateful that they were getting along so well. Every family dinner, every friendly conversation, every moment I'd thought was about them bonding for my sake had actually been about them falling in love with each other. But the worst was yet to come. 3 weeks after that devastating revelation, I got a text message that nearly sent me to the hospital with shock. It was a wedding announcement, complete with professional photos of Ryan and my mother exchanging vows at some seaside ceremony. They'd gotten married. My boyfriend of 2 years had married my mother in a private ceremony, attended by his family and a few close friends. I hadn't been invited, obviously, and I hadn't even known they were engaged. Looking at those photos, my mum in a white dress, Ryan in a suit, both of them glowing with happiness, I felt like I was living in some kind of nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been in a committed relationship and living peacefully with my family. Now, my boyfriend was my stepfather, and my mother was married to the man I'd been sleeping with for 2 years. The social implications were beyond anything I could have imagined. Not only had I lost my relationship and my family support system, but I'd become the center of the most bizarre and humiliating scandal anyone in our social circle had ever witnessed. Friends didn't know how to react or what to say. Some people were sympathetic, recognizing that I was the victim of an incredibly cruel betrayal. But others seemed to find the whole situation darkly amusing, as if my personal tragedy was entertainment for their group chats and dinner party conversations. The wedding photos made the rounds on social media, with people sharing them as examples of the weirdest family drama they'd ever seen. Someone had even created memes using old photos of Ryan and me together, with captions like, "From boyfriend to stepdad, family goals," and "When your mum steals your man, literally." I became a cautionary tale, a punchline, a source of gossip that people would bring up whenever conversation turned to crazy relationship stories. My private humiliation had become public entertainment, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But the practical consequences were even more devastating than the social ones. About 2 months after their wedding, my mum and Ryan, now my mother and stepfather, a phrase that still makes me physically ill to type, sat me down for what they called a family meeting. They explained that, as newlyweds, they needed privacy and space to build their marriage without the complication of having me living in the house. They said it was time for me to find my own place and start building an independent adult life. The conversation was couched in language about personal growth and independence, but the message was clear. They wanted me gone so they could enjoy their new marriage without the awkward presence of the woman Ryan had been with before he married my mother. They gave me 30 days to find somewhere else to live. 30 days to figure out how to afford rent, utilities, and basic living expenses on the unemployment benefits I was still collecting while job hunting. 30 days to pack up the life I'd been building and start over completely from scratch. I tried to argue that I needed more time, that I was still looking for work and couldn't afford to move out yet. But they were firm about the timeline, suggesting that maybe the pressure of having to find my own place would motivate me to accept job offers I might otherwise turn down. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not only had they destroyed my relationship and family structure, but they were now making me homeless during one of the most difficult periods of my adult life. I ended up in a tiny studio apartment in a part of town I could barely afford, furnished with items from thrift stores and whatever I could fit in my small car. The place was depressing and cramped, a far cry from the comfortable home I'd been sharing with people I thought loved and supported me. Moving out was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Ryan helped carry my boxes to the car with this fake cheerful attitude, acting like he was doing me a favor by helping me transition to my exciting new independence. My mum cried and said she'd miss me, as if she hadn't just chosen a man over her own daughter. The whole scene felt surreal and wrong, like I was being punished for crimes I didn't understand. I'd made one stupid joke at a family dinner, and somehow that had justified them destroying my life and making me homeless. Friends tried to be supportive, but I could see the fascination in their eyes, even as they offered sympathy. This was the kind of drama that people couldn't look away from, the kind of story that would be told and retold at parties for years to come. I became that girl whose mom married her boyfriend, whose private family disaster had become legendary in our social circle. People would introduce me to new acquaintances with barely concealed excitement, knowing they were about to share one of the most bizarre relationship stories anyone had ever heard. The isolation was overwhelming. Dating became impossible. How do you explain to someone new that your ex-boyfriend is now your stepfather? How do you bring someone home to meet your family when your family is the man you used to sleep with married to your mother? Holiday celebrations, family gatherings, weddings, graduations, every normal family milestone became a minefield of awkwardness and pain. I was faced with either attending events where I'd have to interact with Ryan as my stepfather, or missing out on important family moments entirely. I chose to miss them. The alternative, sitting at Christmas dinner making small talk with my former boyfriend while he held hands with my mother, was more than I could psychologically handle. The reflection period was brutal and endless. Alone in my depressing studio apartment, I had nothing to do but replay that Sunday dinner conversation and think about how differently I could have handled it. I thought I was being funny, maybe even charmingly provocative, in that way that some people find attractive in a relationship. Instead, I'd apparently given Ryan permission to pursue my mother and justification for destroying our relationship. The joke that had seemed so harmless, calling his dad a silver fox while obviously still being committed to him, had been interpreted as some kind of sign that I wasn't satisfied with our relationship, as if commenting on his father's attractiveness meant I wanted to trade up for an older model. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Ryan and my mom had probably been looking for an excuse to justify what they were already feeling for each other. My stupid comment had just given them the rationalization they needed to pursue their inappropriate attraction. They'd used my words against me, turning one moment of poor judgment into justification for months of betrayal and deception. They'd let me believe I was living in a happy, harmonious household while they were falling in love behind my back. The final gut punch came almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. I received an invitation in my mailbox, a cheerful pastel-colored card inviting me to my mother and stepfather's baby shower. They were expecting their first child together, and they wanted me to celebrate this milestone with their families and friends. Looking at that invitation, I felt something break inside me that I don't think will ever fully heal. They'd not only stolen my boyfriend and made me homeless, but now they were creating a new family to replace the one they'd destroyed. I would have a half-sibling who would grow up calling my ex-boyfriend Daddy and my mother Mommy. This child would never understand the bizarre circumstances of their parents' relationship or the sister they'd displaced in the process. I threw the invitation away without responding, but the image of it stayed burned in my memory. The happy couple who'd built their marriage on the wreckage of my life, now expanding their family, while I struggled to rebuild mine from nothing. 18 months later, I'm still picking up the pieces of the life that was destroyed by one careless comment at a family dinner. I have a better job now, a slightly larger apartment, and I've started dating again, though I'm much more guarded about introducing anyone to my complicated family situation. I learned that words have power and consequences that can't be predicted or controlled, but I also learned that some people will use any excuse to justify betraying the people who trust them most. My joke about Ryan's dad being attractive didn't cause what happened. It just provided convenient cover for two people who wanted to pursue each other, regardless of who they hurt in the process. But mostly I learned that some betrayals are so complete and devastating that they don't just end relationships, they rewrite your entire understanding of family, loyalty, and trust in ways that never fully heal. I laughed when I said his dad was more attractive. Now my ex is my stepdad, and I don't even have a home to cry in. The throwaway joke that lasted 5 seconds had consequences that will follow me for the rest of my life, turning every family gathering into a reminder of how thoroughly I was betrayed by the people I trusted most. One stupid comment, one moment of thoughtless humor, and now I'm the punchline of my own life, living alone while my mother and former boyfriend build their happy family on the foundation of my destruction.